Joshua, I understand that you initially made the act of killing to tell the victims or the survivors' story of the Indonesian genocide, but then things took a turn. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, I began this project in collaboration with a community of survivors, and every time we would film together, every time we would try and talk about what happened in 1965, the military would come and stop us. I would be arrested, our crew would be arrested, our equipment would be taken, or we would be detained, and it was impossible really to get anything done. And at the same time, some of the survivors with whom I was living in this community, it was in a plantation about 60 miles from the city of Medan, where I made the act of killing, they would send me on these missions. They would send us to go film with a neighbor who they suspected or knew was a perpetrator and thought would know, for example, how a loved one had been killed. How one woman sent us to try and find out how her son was killed, someone else how her aunt was killed. And we would go on these kind of missions on behalf of the survivors to find out what had happened and encounter these perpetrators who, within minutes of meeting them, would boast about how they'd killed, about how they'd killed, the details of how they'd killed, and sometimes we'd find out how people's relatives had died. And it was, I realized then that this was this extraordinary situation. It was as though I'd walked into Nazi Germany 40 years after the Holocaust and the Nazis were still in power. The survivors, too afraid to speak, not allowed to speak. The perpetrators, at least unofficially, encouraged to boast about what they had done so that they would be these kind of feared proxies of the state. And I remember feeling this situation is so important, so not extraordinary, but important, that it demands that I give whatever it takes. And now it's about a decade on from I've just finished this film. There was there was this moment where once when it was clear we couldn't really film with the survivors, where we went back, we took a trip to Jakarta to meet the Indonesian human rights community, which we hadn't met yet, with the survivors. And we asked, is this still too sensitive, this history? Is it too dangerous to make this film? Everybody said, no, you're on to something terribly important. We need a film for Indonesians that exposes essentially what everybody already knows, but is too afraid to say. So we need a film that comes like the child in the emperor's new clothes and says, look, the king is naked. Everybody knew it, but is too afraid to say it. But hopefully after it's exposed by this movie, people will be able to talk about what happened and reassess, look at what happened, but also look at the nature of a regime of impunity, of corruption, of fear that's been built essentially on mass graves. So we talked, okay, how can we do this safely? And then one of the survivors said, continue to film the perpetrators, because they boast, you've seen that, and in their boasting, the audience will see exactly why we're so afraid and the nature of this regime. So I started to film every perpetrator I could find across the region, up the chain of command to the city of Medan, where I made the act of killing, and beyond, to army generals retired living in Jakarta, and found that everybody I filmed was open. Within minutes of meeting them, they would tell me these horrific stories of how they killed. And then, right after telling me how they'd killed, often in front of their grandchildren, their wives, their children, they would suggest that they take me to the places where they killed. I would accept those invitations, and then they would launch into these sort of spontaneous demonstrations of how they killed and complain afterwards that they hadn't thought to bring props. They hadn't thought to bring machetes to use as props or friends to play victims. And the questions in my head started to shift from what happened historically, which I was quickly understanding, to what is happening now, in which that the perpetrators want to be seen this way. Why are they boasting about this? For whom are they boasting? What's the function of this boasting? How do they think I hear it? How do they want their society to see them? How do they want the whole world to see them? And how ultimately do they see themselves? And really, in pursuit of answers to those questions, I proposed the following very openly to all of the men I was filming. Look, you've participated in one of the biggest killings in human history. Your whole society's based on it. Your lives are shaped by it. You want to show me what you've done. I want to understand what it means to you in your society. So show me what you've done. In whatever way you want, I'll film the process, I'll film the reenactments, and with that material, I'll try and answer these questions. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to your society? How do you want to be seen? How do you see yourself? And that's what I did.